Well, everybody looks like they're in place. So I'm just going to hand it off to Amber Stinger with the Johnson County League, and she's going to introduce our speaker today.
Hi, everyone. It is my honor to introduce Dr. DeAngela Burns-Wallace. As the Kansas Secretary of Administration, Dr. Burns-Wallace is charged with managing the agency and its 500 plus employees. Before joining Governor Kelly's administration, she served as Vice Provost for undergraduate studies at the University of Kansas. Dr. Burns-Wallace, who is fluent in French and Mandarin Chinese, began her career as a Foreign Service officer with the U.S. State Department and served foreign service tours in China, South Africa, and in Washington, D.C. Throughout her impressive career in higher education and government, the Kansas City, Missouri native has received numerous awards and honors for her work, as well as her steadfast commitment to public service. Despite her many responsibilities, Dr. Burns-Wallace makes time to speak to organizations like ours. When we talked earlier this month, she said she welcomes and values dialogue with people on important issues, like making our democracy stronger. The goal is for everyone who comes to the conversation to feel they have a part and a place. She hopes you come away today feeling that this conversation was tailored just for you. Dr. Burns-Wallace, thank you for being here today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am so excited to join you all this morning. And I can see faces now. I love that. You all know in this virtual world that we've been in for this last year, that interaction to be able to connect is still so missed. And so at least being able to see some of the faces as we talk, and I hope that this becomes a little bit of a conversation. I'm going to, share a few things and talk about kind of where we are, and, as taking your themes of strengthening the democracy and what the next 100 years looks like, and just share some of my thoughts and some of my passions with you. And then I hope to save some time so that we can chat and ask questions and dialogue and share as well. So first and foremost, thank you for allowing me to join your state convention. When I received the invitation, I, as usual, go and do a little bit of work of understanding the organization and the priorities, and just so excited to join you this morning because my career has really been dedicated to issues of access and opportunity and a career of service. And so it lines up so very well with the work that you all do and that you're committed to and that you have celebrated over the years. So when I met with the leadership group to ask about, today and the topic and the things that you were going to cover, we really talked about this idea of, we've hit this milestone, this historic benchmark of 100 years. And what does the next 100 years look like? What's next? How does that come together? And so as I've been reflecting on this and preparing for this conversation, I really took a step back and said, what does a historic benchmark mean? It's definitely not an endpoint, and it's not just a celebration, but that milestone is a moment of reflection where we take a step back and really should ask ourselves, so what did we gain, right? For whom did we make those gains? What was the cost of those gains? And most importantly, as we think about moving forward, what's unfinished? And that's the space I want to sit in this morning, about what's unfinished. When we think about the suffrage movement and how we got to that historic moment and that amendment, the movement was about access, equal access. And I would challenge us to say not just equal access, but even more importantly today, equitable access and rights and representation. So we have to take a step back and say, what do the rights we were seeking and continue to seek at any given moment mean for those who are disenfranchised? What does it mean for those who are marginalized? And how do we support those rights of those others and find those overlapping linkages? So whether we're talking about issues of criminal justice reform, voter rights, suppression or expansion, reproductive rights, environmental rights, there's a reality that issues of gender, issues of race and class, issues of equity, and most importantly, issues of humanity run throughout. So when I said, what's unfinished and how do we think about the next 100 years? I had in my mind a vision board exercise. And I don't know if any of you have done this. Me and my girlfriends every year commit ourselves to a vision board exercise. I think it's more for us to whine and sip and encourage each other in the new year. But we love vision boarding, partially because we have tons of magazines and love the social. But that idea of vision boarding. So if you've never done vision boarding, it really is, you go through and you ask yourself these questions of, what is my year going to be? Or what is my next vision, right? What do I want to rededicate myself to do? So let's think, if we were to think about what's next and what is unfinished, like a vision board exercise. What do we want to rededicate to? What are those things that give us vision and inspire us and reflect on what we've done, but more importantly, push us to where we want to be? So I'm going to run with this idea of rededication, but I'm also going to bring in a piece of the power of partnership and alliances, finding that common vision and that common ground. When we think about rededication, so it's funny, about 3 years ago, I will tell you, I have never been the person that exercised and ate healthy and none of those types of things. That was just not me, right? But about 3 years ago, I lost a really good friend of mine to heart health issues at a very young age. We went to college together. He was in his 40s. And after losing him, a group of us kind of doubled down on getting ourselves together from a health and spiritual standpoint. So I started doing something crazy, CrossFit of all things, pushing tires and flipping, flipping tires and pushing sleds and powerlifting. And for the last 3 years, I get up 3-4 days a week at 5 a.m. and go to my boutique gym and CrossFit and powerlift, and it's my sanity. And every few months, my trainer reminds me and asks me, do you remember your why? And is it time to rededicate to your why? So as we think about this vision board of what's next, we go back to what was the why of doing this work and what we're committed to. And when we think about rededicating, I would say first, we have to be intentional. We have to create that insatiable hunger that those women had about fighting for access and equal rights and representation. And being intentional starts with remembering the why, but it is also about building, not just supporting our pipelines, but ensuring that we're a part of creating them. So for me, when I think about how we do this and where we are right now, and from what I know and have learned and continue to learn about Kansans and the work that we're doing, it is so important to ask the questions. And for organizations like yours and individuals that have the passion and commitment that you all have, to be asking the questions of not only who is running and what is their agenda and how are they supporting Kansas in an equitable and a representative way, but walking that conversation backwards to say who is in the pipeline and how do we help change the pipeline? Because if we only focus on who is running when they start or who is sitting in the leadership seats once they get there, we miss the opportunity to be transformative. So how do we think about and ask the questions of looking in each and every of our cities and our counties and saying, who's sitting on the city council? Who's sitting on the school boards? Who's sitting on the planning commissions? Ask for the data of how is that representative of the populations that they are representing and serving? How many women sit on those boards and commissions? How many individuals of color that are reflective of that area sit in those roles on those boards and commissions? Asking who is doing the appointing and how do we ensure that those lists that they are appointing from are reflective of who we want in that representation. But it's also about being intentional about the partnerships. I serve on an advisory board with United We, and they are partnering under their project of the Appointments Project and also with KU's Public Management Center on their project of Ready to Run. Between the Appointments Project and Ready to Run, these are two organizations that are committed to preparing the next generation of boards and commission leaders and individuals understanding and having the tools and the mentorship to run. So sometimes it's not even about us having to do every piece of the work, but how are we spotlighting, highlighting, and supporting those that are doing work that help feeds into what we're supporting? Because if we don't build the pipeline, we can't truly be transformative. Being intentional and remembering our why really ignites or reignites that hunger. The second piece of my vision board, as I think about this, that moves from rededication into representation. I am on Facebook and Twitter and all those different places and love a hashtag. Representation Matters is one of those hashtags that we've seen over and over. And in the last year, you saw it more often than not in many different ways because of some of the historic things that happen nationally and regionally. But Representation Matters is not just a hashtag, and nor should it be. Because if we go back to the why and how we got here in this work, as much as it was about not just the right to vote, it was about the right for that representation to be reflective of those women and their voices and the issues that were impacting them. So when we talk about representation matter, for me, it is the heart of who I am in my career journey. I'm a first generation college student, born and raised in Kansas City. Neither of my parents have college degrees. My dad worked for Southwestern Bell for his entire career. My mom worked at different companies like Sears and Montgomery Ward's, Payless Cashways as an accounting clerk. And as I had the opportunity to move through my career, my degrees, the various illustrious places that I've been, for me, in every place that I walked through, I was very clear that I was a woman, a Black woman, a Midwestern Black woman. Because in many of the circles that I served in, being from this region, we were also underrepresented. To be a foreign service officer, and particularly a foreign service officer of color and female, I'd arrive in countries like when I served in China or when I served in South Africa and was told by leaders in that country, you couldn't possibly be the representative. Why not? Well, At the time, early in my foreign service career, I was mostly in my 20s when I was overseas. Well, first of all, you're too young. Secondly, you're a woman. Thirdly, you're Black, particularly not only in China, but even in South Africa. That came up. Because in their mind, the US meant white and male. But me being present and saying, I am the press attaché, I am the senior management officer for this consulate, right? I am the public affairs officer. I am the legislative affairs officer. And I represent the United States of America and everything that we are. Change the ideas for some people about what it means to be an American. When I was in China, like my language training, we learned a lot of words. And I had to call, I remember calling my language instructor back at the Foreign Service Institute. And I said, I need a few vocabulary words. And he's like, well, what's wrong? You've had a year of training, you know your words. I said, no, I need you to give me some words that like middle passage, slavery, right? Like there were words that I didn't know in a language that I was functioning in. When people would ask me, how can you represent a country that treated you and your history in such a way? And I had to be able to talk about what middle passage was and what slavery was, but also what we had done, like the 19th Amendment, the Civil Rights Amendment since then, that made our country what it is today. And that as much as this country might be a struggle and a fight in our history might be something we don't want to talk about, if we don't have these dialogues, then you don't understand how we got here and you cannot understand how we go forward. So I needed to have the language. I share that because some of my challenge in the work that all of us are trying to do right now is that it feels that we're not using the language, right? That we have issues that are facing us around policies and ideals and race and society and class and access, and we call them difficult dialogues. And please understand that they are difficult. But the more important word in that conversation is dialogue. If we are not having the dialogue, we can never make them undifficult. So we have to build the language. We have to push the representation. Just as those women 100 years ago were intentional about where they placed individuals, where they put their support, how they maneuvered and understand the system for which they were in and use that system to be able to say, this is what we say we are. So because of that, this is what that means for our representation. We have to double down and re-articulate exactly what it is that we need and what we're committed to. When I think about moving forward, we don't have to overcomplicate it. We actually don't need to look forward and say, okay, what do we do now for the next 100? Because some of our work is still unfinished from the first 100. There are still populations that are interwoven into the issues that were championed in the 19th Amendment that do not have equal access to the space. I'm going to share my screen. For those of you who know a little bit of my background, I love to teach. And so this is one of my teaching tools. Can you all see that? So some of you may have seen there's another graphic. It's the baseball field and there's people behind fences and they say, you know, equity and access and equality. I found this one a few years ago and I use this because I love this book. My son loved this book. And I love the way that it portrays this conversation, right? When we start to talk about equality, inequality, most people are clear on. It means, oh, everybody doesn't have access. So we need to make things equal. But equality means, in many ways, in this idea of giving everybody the tools so that everybody is equal. But I need you to look at the bend of that tree. If everybody gets the same tools, but the tree for which we are getting fruit is bent, how does that tool give them access? So sometimes when we're talking about these things and using language, this idea of equality can confuse things. And I want to challenge us to think about, what does access, inclusion, equity, and justice mean? Because then we move from this view to this. Equity is when the tools are actually addressing the inequalities that our society has created across time. That society, and because of our histories and those difficult conversations, has a bend. And if we approach all of our work from a pure equal standpoint, we give equal tools, and those tools does not address the bend. So as we begin and continue to look to the next 100 years, I challenge us to think both about equity, thinking about the tools, the policies, the structures, the people that we put in places that help both address the inequality, but more importantly, begin to work towards social justice. Because at the end of the day, we want the system to be corrected. We want that tree to no longer lean. That is the work that is hard, right? If we're honest. But when we talk about what's next, if we don't understand that we aren't talking about equal, but that we are talking about issues of equity, inclusiveness, and justice, as we think about representation, as we think about the policies, the laws, the appointments, if we don't understand these things as those who are committed to doing the work, committed to championing access and opportunity, then we will miss the mark. So as I wrap up, the last piece I will say is, in any space, whether it is me in my gym with my trainer who drives me crazy, right? Or in the environment when I'm working with my staff, or when we're serving in a volunteer roles within our organizations, there is one thing that we don't always do, but that is essential when we think about success and the next steps. And that is accountability. As we do this work, as we ask the question of what is unfinished from the first 100 years, we also need to think about, how do we hold our communities, our organizations, and our leaders accountable? What does accountability look like? I'm a data person, so I'm always looking for the data. I'm always looking for the change. I'm always saying, what is our baseline and where did we start and how did we get there? But some of our change also comes in a more qualitative way from culture and attitudes, right? And there's ways to measure that as well. But if we leave out the piece about accountability, holding ourselves accountable, being clear about where we're going, and rededicating to what that looks like in terms of equitable rights, access, inclusion, representation. If we don't hold ourselves, our communities, and our leaders accountable, this is all for naught, right? Accountability, I love it. I just do. As a trained public policy person, like that's the stuff that gets me excited. Because when we can show change and we can show the impact and the outcomes, right? When we start to work in this area of equity, there are some that come to the conversation assuming that that means less than, assuming that to do that, we must give up something. And I challenge to say, when we really do it correctly, and we are holding accountable and we are going back to the data, we actually achieve what we call in education and in higher education, inclusive excellence. And think about how the work that we do can be considered excellent if it is not inclusive, if it is not reflective of those we serve. So holding ourselves accountable is a piece that has to be part of this puzzle. We got to do good work. We got to do hard work. We got to go back to our why, be intentional, build the pipeline. Representation must be at our center. And then we got to close that loop with the accountability of what does that look like for Kansans, for our communities, for those that are impacted by our policies, by our laws, by our processes, and by those that lead and disenfranchise or marginalized across the board. The last thing that I'll say is this. For me, I accept as many of these invitations to have the conversations as I possibly can. It's my passion. It's who I am. But more importantly, for me, it's part of my responsibility. You can read through my bio and my resume, and I have been blessed and fortunate and worked hard to be in the pockets and the spaces and the places for which I have been and for which I currently sit. But I didn't get here alone. I won't be the last in the spaces for which I sit, because I will make sure of that. But even more importantly, everyone cannot have a seat at the tables for which I sit. And I take very seriously what it means to bring voice and perspective of the journeys that I have and that I represent to those tables and to those conversations. That in and of itself is our why, and why representation truly matters. Let's take some questions.
That was wonderful. Martha or Jennifer, did you want to throw some questions from chat out?
So Leslie has asked Dr. Burns-Wallace talk a little bit from the practical application aspect, how her work as Kansas Secretary of Administration develops and uses this critical element of inclusive excellence, accountability, and justice. how does this play out in our governance today? This seems so elemental, but if the political space continues to be so lopsided, using your example of the tree, how do we teach those not engaged in civic life to understand this unsexy? And I love that. I love the way you refer to it. Part of managing our lives, communities, and countries, our country. Thank you so much, Leslie, for that question.
Yep. No, Leslie, thank you. Here's the reality of this, right? And it is unsexy for many people, right? It is the stuff that sometimes can be in the weeds. What I will say from the seat that I sit in, and so as the Secretary of Administration, also I'm the Chief Information Technology Officer. Those are roles that are behind the scenes in many ways, right? And many people see them as just administrative and the things that, make things work. For me, it is actually, if we think about it, at the core of how our state government operates, right? My agencies and the work that we do across state government, for instance, impacts how and who the state contracts with from procurement. We are over buildings, leases, places that we are in, how we impact different regions and communities from real estate and development standpoint. We are responsible for all state personnel, HR, and everything associated with them, right? Just as a few examples. Part of the work that we have to do is think about how do we make, I had in a few of my notes, these idea of small victories or focused victories, right? So my goal in the work that I do on a day-to-day basis is how do I leave the environments for which I have control and full purview different and better and more inclusive than how I came into them, right? So for instance, with the state employees, we have started a women's initiative that is called Kansas Wise. We have also started a DEI initiative that is looking at and analyzing our workplace environment as a state employer to see if we are creating and how do we create a more inclusive environment. But on top of that, we're doing something that's even more elementary. As a state, while we have policies in place that say every state employee should be have an annual evaluation, those are paper forms. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's rolled down to the agencies, things of that nature. And I'm giving a very specific example because I think it's important for us to think about it, right? Right now, we are looking to put in a statewide talent management system and a learning management system so that every state employee at any point in time can see where their evaluations are. They can see and set their goals. There is feedback mechanisms for them to go in and between their employer and their supervisors. There will also be learning and development that is built into this platform that can be both assigned, but also can be searched for someone to do their own development. It has a whole module that is about succession planning and personal and professional growth. We will implement this for all state employees before I am done. From someone who's looking at it from the outside, they're like, okay, you're putting in a talent management system. That should just be there. But understand what that means in terms of empowerment and access and equity for state employees at all different levels, moving through and doing their work that is impacting Kansas, right? We have to begin to think about not just how do we get these huge victories that are way over there that like seem daunting. You have to take the seat you sit in and look at the policies and procedures that are under your purview and how do you begin to change them? Not artificially, but where you are foundationally changing the nature of how people engage, how people access information, how people develop, how people grow, right? And as you do that, you will then have ripple effects into other spaces. As we started to do this work and we're looking at work with state procurement, we are looking at how do we get to a place where we actually are identifying and having preferences in our processes for state procurement around women and minority and small owned businesses. We don't have that. And most other states do. right? Think about how transformative that is when we get that in place. But we have to work towards that. And the first step is our system doesn't even have a way to capture that currently. That doesn't make sense, but it will in about 3 months. And then once I'm capturing it, we then find the partners to help us move that conversation and change and enact some of that legislation that aligns with federal and all other states, that empowers our women and minority business owners to be on file and receiving contracts with the state of Kansas, just like they're doing across our borders and with federal government, right? How do you change the space and the place that you sit in? All right, I know that there's some other questions. I was looking in the, as I was talking.
She wants to know how you mentioned language and dialogue as being so important, and yet we appear to be in an environment which that polarization makes this very difficult. Oh my goodness, how true is that? We've talked about this in our league, and we wonder whether you have any suggestions on getting dialogue started between groups of people that see things ever so differently.
Yeah. So this is where we talk about common ground, right? So sometimes you got to start in a place of what do you agree upon to build out to what don't you agree upon, right? So go back to like the, if we go back to school, and you know, what is the least common denominator? Right, between the conversation? Do we both believe that our communities need X, Y, and Z? Do we believe that certain resources need to be leveraged into our communities? Now, we're going to disagree which resources and how they can be allocated, but what is our least common denominator? And how do we come around the table to start a conversation there? Once we start that conversation, we have to be willing to listen, right? On both sides. You got to come to the table with an agreement of, we may not always agree, but we agree that we're going to listen. Right? What does listening mean? It means, what evidence do you have that you can bring to the table? What evidence do I have that we can bring to the table? How do those compare and contrast? How do we actually use the data and the experiences of those that are impacted positively and negatively to inform where we want to go? Right? And on some level, there's going to be winners and losers. There's going to be levels of compromise. But before we get all the way there, are we even understanding the problem the same? Do we have all the right information? Are we capturing the voices? I always ask, when we start to deal with difficult conversations, whose voice is missing from that conversation? And you need to start by inviting them to it. In these difficult dialogue spaces, you got to start small. But you got to start with the least common denominator. What are the things that we agree upon that we can start the dialogue with, right? But you also got to be willing to understand that some people may not be ready, right? So how do you continue to plant the seed and bring the conversation back and continue to show the benefits of what equity and justice work and how that impacts a community, moving it to spaces of excellence, making you eligible for different resources, creating opportunity for different things that you would not have or be accessible to. When we think about who and what is coming into Kansas that wants to support Kansas, right? We can all agree we want more businesses that can impact Kansas and bring and revitalize the economy and all of that. But we also got to understand what that means for those companies coming in and what they are looking for in our communities to be reflective of. And so if we agree that we want the businesses, that creates an opportunity for the dialogue about what our communities need to be reflective of from a value standpoint to ensure that those businesses are going to come and grow and thrive. It's not easy and it's not fast. That's the other piece of this. All right, other questions? One thing that happens when you ask why, how do you both nurture and repopulate your pipelines? Is that the next question in the queue? Am I looking at that right?
Yep, take that one.
Okay, thank you. And I'm scrolling through, but it keeps moving up. So please help me if I miss something. You know, Pipelines are a part of my research from an educational standpoint. I was a student who was a part of a number of pipeline programs. The way that I ended up being a Foreign Service officer, a diplomat, was because I was selected in my sophomore year of college as one of 10 fellows in the nation for the US State Department for a program that was designed to diversify the ranks of the Foreign Service. And that program then mentored us for our last 2 years of undergrad through grad school, and then we entered the Foreign Service. It also had incentives where it paid for parts of undergrad, it paid for our master's degree, but it also gave us experiences. I interned internationally at an embassy. I interned in Washington, DC. I went to summer policy institutes. I went to writing and policy making institutes that helped me understand and learn how to be that policymaker, how to write like one, how to think like one, right? So it wasn't just like, here, we're going to give you this opportunity because you're, a young Black girl. It was, our priority is to diversify and make the Foreign Service more reflective of who we are. We're identifying the best and the brightest to be able to do that. And then we are infusing them with those skills necessary to be successful. So as we think about how do you nurture and repopulate those pipelines, let's begin to take them apart. What is our outcomes? What are we trying to achieve? We want more representation in the seats, whether that's in the legislature, whether that's with our cities and counties and boards and commissions, wherever that may be. Then walk it backwards, right? Who are the partners who's helping to do the work to prepare? Where are the individuals that will sit in those seats, and how do we identify them early? What types of resources do we need to give them? One, potentially to incentivize and introduce them to what this path is and the impact of them. And then two, how do we surround them with the resources to make them prepared and successful? I talk a lot in my higher ed space about readiness. Readiness is when opportunity hits preparation, right? When I got the phone call from Governor Kelly's staff to come and consider the seats that I'm sitting in, and we had this conversation about what that meant and what my interest might be, and if it was a fit for the roles and all of those things. It was a very tough conversation because I love the role and the work that I was doing at the University of Kansas, and we were having real change and transformative impact on student success. But I was ready because I had been preparing for years, unbeknownst to me, to sit in this role. But that opportunity where someone carried my name forward to say, I think this person can do it, came together with me being prepared. And I was ready to lead and step in. We have to think about our pipelines in that way. How do we get that next generation of leaders ready? And be clear, when I say next generation of leaders, I'm not talking generational in terms of age, because leaders come in all shapes and fashions and form and ages. And you all may have had a great career doing one thing. And right now you're sitting there thinking, I want to do something else. There is never a limit on when and how to lead. We just have to lead in different places and from different seats. And we got to reflect that so that people understand that when we say the next generation of leaders, they're going to be young. They're going to be more seasoned. They're going to have careers that line up directly, and they're going to have years of experience in other spaces that inform how they're going to lead differently in the future. And we have to pipeline both. Pipelining does not mean just simply focusing on the young. Another question. Marcy asked, we asked for fiscal notes for our bills. Should we ask for equity notes? I love that. Right. And that can, I think it creates some interesting things. I think it's an important thing to think about when we are asking about those fiscal notes. It's this idea of what is going to be the impact of this policy, right? And we typically do go to the fiscal. But I would say if you look at some policies that have come through in the last few years or at any point in time, if you ask that same question on population, right? Who is being marginalized by this policy? Who are the have and the have nots of this policy, right? What are the unintended consequences of this policy that we see manifested in other ways? I don't know if that's an equity note or what we call it, but I think there is power in trying to understand how our policies impact different parts of our society. Otherwise, we continue to signal that only certain parts and people matter. Next, yes, what are the possible outcomes? Other questions? I'm looking, sorry.
That's okay. Linda wants to know about who's being impacted and what's the impact on our environment and what is the best possible outcome.
Those are the types of questions, right? Like Linda's like right on, right? Like when we pop up a policy, we do ask fiscally, what's the impact, right? But if we're really leading across our state, and if we're trying to enact policies that are making Kansans and Kansas better, fiscal is one aspect, but it's not the only, right? Our communities, the growth and development of our communities, of our populations, of our young and our old in particular, right? What does that mean for businesses? What does that mean for how communities develop and grow, right? And we are a state that has both a urban and a rural, and many times our policies have a divide in those spaces. When you talk about dialoguing, that space of dialogue is so ready and rich, and there is some work being done there. But again, that intentionality into that space has to go another step further, right? And when we start to ask the question, whose voice is missing, right? Whose voice is not reflective of the conversation that is happening? It's when it sheds light on this idea of inclusion and exclusion. Because if their voice, if their lived experiences, if their journey is not reflective of how that policy or law will play out in our state, then we have done those citizens of our state a disservice. I know we're right at noon, right? And I think that was our cutoff, but
we could have you all afternoon if you would have us, but I want to thank you for donating your time and sharing your experience and your expertise with our members. We as volunteers need to be reminded of the why, and we need inspiration from people like you who are doing it every day. We need that inspiration to do the hard work, the unfinished work, and we just really appreciate your leadership and your willingness to share your time and your expertise with us today. So thank you so much, Dr. Burns-Wallace.
Yeah, thank you. Like, again, the work that you all are doing is essential. It is key. It is critical. It's the partnerships, right? We can't do what we do in Topeka without having the citizens out there that are civic minded, that are pushing the conversation, that are willing to lean in. So continue the fight, continue the good work, continue to ask the hard and difficult questions, and continue to hold our communities and our leaders accountable, right?
Yeah. Right back at you. And someday we'd all like to peek at your vision board too. So
Yeah.
I want to be her when I grow up. That's all I'm saying. So I think we should all unmute ourselves and show our appreciation for Dr. Burns-Wallace. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah.